flowering leaves of all these life-giving trees that flow in the breeze, giving us the air to breathe, came from the seeds that sons and daughters had sown, passing down histories through stories, genes, and bones. Hear the whispers of the past, dictate your prologue, a generational griot through which memories are prolonged. So we reach down like nourishing waters to seek truths, except we receive nourishment when we're digging the roots.
Happy Wednesday and welcome to BlackProGen Live. I'm your host, Nika Smith, and we are so grateful that you took time out of your Wednesday night to join us for our next iteration of BlackProGen Live. Tonight is our 45th episode of this show, and we've got a lot of good content, conversation, tea, scalding tea, you name it, hits, misses, whatever else that we're going to talk about tonight because, gosh, it's high time for genealogy in our land of the world, or actually I would say the world is actually the world, really, because it's a worldwide program. But regardless, if you're joining us and you haven't seen us before, you're in for a treat because we have some amazing people here to talk to you tonight about genealogy. Our topic for the evening: Finding Your Roots recap. Dive in with us as we discuss this year's season of PBS's Finding Your Roots by Dr. Henry Louis Gates. Get fresh perspective about the high notes and low notes from genealogists and family historians of color. So that's our topic for this evening's show. Before we jump in completely, don't forget to join the conversation. Be sure to tweet us at BlackProGen. You can also use the hashtag BlackProGen. Also, if you're watching live on YouTube, there is a live chat taking place. It's in the top right-hand corner of your screen if you're watching on a computer, but if you're using the YouTube app on your mobile device, the live chat is at the bottom of the page. There are plenty of chatters that are out there tonight. We've got folks coming in from all over the place. We love our Tierra Kellos of the world. Denise Muhammad, Beth Wiley is here. Of course, my son just made a nice appearance, as he always does. Linda Okazaki's in the crowd tonight. We've got a lot of chatter. So we love to hear your feedback. We love to hear your comments, whatever questions, whatever it is as the night goes on. So be sure to join us on Twitter or in the live chat on YouTube. Have you been like, man, I can't believe I missed that episode of that show? I need reminders. Well, here is your reminder to set reminders. All you need to do is head to my YouTube page and click set reminder under the episode you're interested in, or simply subscribe to the channel and you'll get a reminder each and every time we go live. Also, we want to make sure to remind you to get the latest and greatest from BlackProGen in your inbox. Subscribe to The Lowdown today. It's our collective feed of blogs, podcasts, and more generated by the panel and friends. Check the description of this recording and any BlackProGen Live episode for the link to subscribe to The Lowdown. All right. Hello, I'm your host, Nika Smith. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm here in Dark, Tennessee. We want to go ahead and introduce the panelists tonight. We've got a full house, and there are 3 Y chromosomes in the house. So you know we have to make sure we give them a lot of testosteronic love. Yes, I did make up that verb. Actually, adjective. Testosteronic love is in the house. All right, so we're going to go with our 2 youngest. We'll get the Y chromosomes out of the way first. Let's go with Alex Traps.
Hi, everybody. Alex Traps calling
from
Oakland.
Oh, no. That might just be me. Sorry, go ahead, Alex.
This is Alex Traps calling from Oakland, California.
Nika, what's wrong? I can't hear your sound.
Willie, we can't hear you. I don't know if you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
There you go.
There you go.
Okay. Hi, I'm Willie Russell from Oakland, California.
All right, all right. Our third and usual resident Y chromosome, he has a home here on BlackProGen Live Street. He's probably at 2 BlackProGen Live Street or 3 BlackProGen Live Street. That would be Mr. James Morgan III.
Good evening, everybody. I'm James Morgan III, coming to you from right outside the nation's capital of Washington, D.C. I'm proud to be here as the leader of the Zulu Warriors this evening, and we're here to represent.
Don't you love his little tagline? I think, therefore I am. He has a quote. Lord have mercy. It's going to be a long evening. All right, let's go down to Florida to our love, our heart, Ellen Fernandez-Sacco.
Hey, everybody. It's Ellen Fernandez-Sacco from Tampa. So I'm really happy to be here tonight, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. Yeah.
Awesome. All right, the lady in red. The lady in red. The lady in red. The Lady in Red. You probably don't even remember that song. Stevie Wonder. YouTube it if you're too young to remember. There was a movie called The Lady in Red. But tonight we're going to talk about Angela Walton Raji.
Hello, everyone. This is Angela Walton Raji coming to you from the beautiful state of Maryland on the eastern seaboard in the mid-Atlantic states, coming from Baltimore.
All right. And since she tapped herself into that conversation, let's go ahead and get on to Renata.
Hi, this is Renata Yarborough Sanders coming to you from Newport News, Virginia. Glad to be here again tonight, everybody.
All right. And she just finished letting the Laissez Bon Temps rouler in Louisiana. Let's go ahead and go straight to Bernice Alexander Bennett.
Hello, everyone. Yes, I am back from Nolans. Happy to be back home and happy to be on the show.
All right. And we have two favorite Boricuas, but we're going to go with the most northern one, Teresa Vega.
Teresa Vega, representing NYC.
All right. And last but not least is our Kentuckian in residence, holding it down on Twitter and all social media sites and letting us know all the facts, our girl, True Lewis.
Hello, everybody out there on YouTube and in the audience and wherever you're checking in from. And it's me, True Lewis, that girl at My True Roots, checking in from Kentucky. It's so good to see everybody on the panel.
It is. I like how we have a full house. And I will say, I know my mama is watching, so say hello, mama. Because she told me she was going to watch. Hi, Mama BJ. And my other surrogate mama / first cousin / love mama research partner, Freedom Writer, is in the chat room. Jean, if you all have met my cousin Jean, she actually made it to join us tonight. So she is in the chat room. So be sure to say hello to her because she doesn't get a lot of chances to join us. But you are here. We have a lot of viewers right now. I don't know if the panel realizes, but there are a lot of people watching this. That's great, though. But we're here to talk about Finding Your Roots. We are on season 4 right now of this show. Lots of content, lots of things to talk about when it comes to episodes 3 and 4. And so the first question I'm going to ask is, what were some of the portions of episodes 3 and 4 that you like? We're talking about Mary Steenburgen. We're talking about Ted Danson, episode 3. The other,
William H. Macy.
William H. Macy was episode 3. Mm-hmm. And then last night we had Ava Duvernay. Love Ava Duvernay. She walks on water as far as I'm concerned. We had her. We had Ta-Nehisi Coates. And then we had Janet Mock. So what were the portions of episodes 3 and 4 that you liked? Pin drop.
Well,
pin drop.
Come on through, James.
Let me get the team ready.
I was just waiting my turn.
I was trying not to go first, but I have a list of things here that no, I'm fine. No, I mean I enjoyed them. You know, I do like learning about other people's families in general, even if they're not people of color. Just to find out that Ted Danson's ancestor, like the house was still there. I thought that was kind of cool. I like seeing, because one thing to say, well, there was a house here, this is where they lived, but that the fact that they had like an actual structure that he could go back to and his family could go back to, I thought that was pretty cool. I know a lot of folks kind of zoomed in on the fact that the enslaved individual that his ancestor once owned, actually had some notoriety on it in his own right. I know that I thought that was pretty cool as well, because it will allow him, if him and his family choose to go in and possibly learn about other aspects of their ancestors' narrative that may not be inside the narrative that they wrote for themselves. So they can kind of get a third person perspective on it from somebody who might not have many nice things to say, maybe.
I just rewatched that episode tonight, and I had forgotten about Ted Danson's reaction to finding out that his ancestor was a slave owner, and then finding out that he had freed, I don't remember which ancestor it was, but he had freed the enslaved person, and then that person had bought his wife and children. And Danson was visibly bothered by the whole thing, and it was like Dr. Gates was trying to smooth it out for him and make it look real good that ancestor had been freed and everything, but Danson was just clearly like, but it's still not right to own another human being. And his reaction to that was just touching to me, because he was really dealing with it.
I think I like James's commentary in terms of the fact that when one learns that one had enslaved others, it does add another dimension to that narrative. And I think that's very, very important, because that's something that has never been encouraged. There's no rule book. And as we get deeper and deeper into researching this aspect of history, both from those of us who descend from the enslaved, as well as those who descend from the slaveholder, we're treading new ground. But I think that, as Renata just pointed out, you could see him trying to process this. And then you saw the host saying, oh, but he freed him, it's okay. And it's not okay. And rightfully so. He was trying to process this. And there perhaps needs to be more discussion on how to proceed once one learns that about an ancestor. And also those of us who have been researching for quite some time, our enslaved ancestors, we don't have a rule book to follow either. And we still have to deal with emotions of seeing our ancestors on an estate inventory. And how do we cope with that? And I think it's a very good opportunity for further discussion, and not to give anyone a pass. It's okay, they were free. Okay, it's a painful reality, but let's learn this other narrative and maybe assist each other in finding this dimension.
And you know something on that? I'm sorry, I don't mean to speak twice, but me and Renata, we talked about that earlier today regarding how we shape our identities, because like I remember when I had one relative that he was Caucasian, and he basically was like apologizing to me for his ancestors having enslaved my ancestors, and I was like, well, yeah, thank you, but I'm also descended from that same white family too. So it's like, but we identify based on our political and our skin color today, but we don't think about the fact that there's other narratives even to ourselves sometimes. Am I making sense to somebody out there? Can I get amen, somebody? All right.
Yeah, amen. But when it comes to emotions, I think that people should be allowed to feel. And that if they appear to be upset, or if they even want to apologize, I think we should allow them to do what feels right for them, rather than to say, oh, you don't have to apologize. If that feels right for you at that particular time, do what you need to do. But keep in mind that this peculiar institution did exist. And while everyone is searching through their ancestral tree, they're going to find some really uncomfortable information. And it's how we choose to react to that information. And I try not to sugarcoat it, but also at least give that person an opportunity to feel what they need to feel. And sometimes it is sadness.
Do you all think that obviously we all come to this with a different perspective, because we're usually part enslaved person and part enslaver. And so for us, it, in some ways, it almost gives us the opportunity, you know, to be the one that sits up high and looks down low on this situation. But that can be a challenge. I mean, we have to acknowledge that that can potentially be a challenge for somebody who's a descendant of a slaveholder only, right? Because they're coming at it from the perspective of, I have this, you know, ancestor who, for whatever reason, decided to own people, and I may not subscribe to that ideology now, but you know, my family did, and I feel responsible. So maybe I might apologize, like Bernice just brought up. But then for us, we have that, but you still own people. You know what I'm saying? There's that other part of us that's like, but no. You know what I mean? And so, do you ever think we'll eclipse that? But no, or do you think that's?
I would jump in to say here, for me, it's always an issue about telling the truth, telling the historical truths out there. I can't, you know, I'm a descendant of slaves and slave owners. I'm not going to butter up what my slave owner ancestors did. They did it. So I need to tell the truth about their lives. Now, as you know, I'm writing my blog post on my Virginia. I have an 8th great grandfather who petitioned to have permission to mutilate his slaves. He did that. Yeah, he was the richest, one of the richest landowners in Virginia at that time, but he still did this. And for me, I'm not co-signing on that. I can't. As long as I have those folks, their blood still runs in my vein, I can't co-sign on that. But I will tell the truth. He did this, but he did this. And that is what I think we all need to do, is to tell the truth of our ancestors, whoever they may be.
But that begs the question, what is the truth? Because the truth, especially in today's day and times, means different things to different people.
Well, for me, as far as I know, if I can find a record that says he mutilated Madagascar Jack and it's in his own papers and he did it, that's the truth.
Right.
That's a receipt.
I think the whole thing has to be complicated further, even more, because I think the big risk with this show is that it falls into the dichotomy again of black versus white, and that is like a disservice to the complexity of even the panel that is here. I'm really bothered by it because when the Puritans had the first reservation, when we look at Nantucket, 3,000 people were living on that island. And I'm not blaming the families. I'm just saying these are histories that are there and they're not acknowledged. These people were taken as slaves from Massachusetts and sold in the Caribbean. And, you know, there's a lot of Native ancestry there that even before they get to the slave ownership, there's already stories that compromise this kind of national narrative, if you want to call it that. And it doesn't make the national narrative any less. And I think that's what the thing that people are coming to, is that, you know, we can tell these stories now, we can speak these truths, and people are just kind of like finally opening up and saying, this is part of me, you know?
So do you think, and me and True had a conversation about this earlier. To me, the truth for some people is, when you're writing that blog post or you're creating that book about your ancestor and you know that they were a slaveholder, the truth to them is, I'm saying, and on this tax paper, you know, this tax receipt, he had 78 slaves. For them, that's enough of the truth. But what I think that we're saying is humanize those folks once again by naming them.
Definitely.
That's the extra step that shows care. It's the difference between a Larry David laughing and Ted Danson's response.
Right.
Right. Like Dr. Berry says, you got to make them a person. You got to recognize them as people. In her book, she says that.
Well, I think that one of the things that you just mentioned, Nika, was the laughter. And many of us, you know, we watch it as a group, many of us watching it at the same time in a small group. And many of us were commenting as the show was airing, and if we go back to the episode, I guess it was Larry David, and I know it was laughter perhaps coming from discomfort. So, but it made a lot of people uncomfortable. But beyond that, there's the other laughter that we've seen that often. And there's nothing really that funny about enslavement. There's also nothing funny about either side, whether the enslaved or the enslaver. Neither one is very funny. And I know that it is something that we have to allow, which I appreciated seeing the reaction of Ted Danson when he's realizing, whoa, this is not quite something that I'm embracing as part of that narrative, and that was new. And yes, it's okay, my brother, he freed him, but it's still a heinous institution, and we should not joke. None of our history is jokeable. Right. And it is something we do need to allow them to feel, as Bernice said.
But you know what? I understand that and I agree with that, but I also think that this kind of goes back to what my point was earlier about how today we as individuals, sometimes we identify a certain way. And so when we find out our ancestors are, something that may be the opposite of what we stand for today, for example, many of us, and I'm just going to throw probably one of the biggest ones out there. A lot of people in the African American community are Democrats, and then we go back in our ancestry and find, grandpa, grandma, they were active Republicans, that just as an example. And so when the Larry David thing happened, I understand where people's discomfort will come from, but I'm also thinking about it from his perspective as an individual, coming from, New York and having, for him to have such deep Southern roots, and I can't have that conversation because I don't know the conversations that white families have in their homes when blacks aren't around. But I don't know if the South was something that he really thought was going to come up, or if he did think, maybe it was to me, I thought it was more that he was laughing at the irony. But everybody may not feel that way. But that's kind of what I've got from it, with him being a New Yorker. Like,
yeah, but that's the thing. It could be interpreted different ways. True. Because I think we all saw it as definitely nervous laughter, but it's an interesting juxtaposition between him and Ted Danson and his reaction to everything that happened. So let's talk about some of the challenges you had with the last two episodes. We talked about, let's just lay them out because there's a reason why everybody was super quiet.
All right, the slave schedules.
Bernice, your mouth is killing me right now. I just want to say that.
Let's talk about slave schedules.
She got tight lips.
I don't deal with these slave schedules. I just don't deal with. There's a lot that happens.
So there was, and for the viewers tonight, we are going to talk about that at length. We are, but that is definitely the biggest bone of contention that I've seen from the vast amount of people that I've seen online. All that is how the slave schedules were dealt with. This has been a continual sort of issue the entire series, right? If we go back to previous seasons, we've had that, a female child showed up as a male, or, we've had, this is your ancestor. And I think they have addressed some of that this season with some of the language that was used. So. They try to, it's like, we think, or it's a huge possibility that this could be your ancestor, but we're going to treat that separate slave schedules issue. We're going to, how you go to the orthopod if you injured your shoulder and you're going to go in for surgery. We're going to do surgery on that later. So let's just stay internal medicine right now. We haven't gone specialty yet. So
triage.
We're triage. So what do you all feel besides the slave schedule issue in the last episodes that you couldn't get with?
Honestly, I thought that it would have been. I understand that they're having these three different guests or what have you. I kind of liked it when they had it with two guests, because they were allowed to go deeper with each one. So that's kind of like a formatting thing. But I thought, like with Ava Duvernay, that it would have been nice if they could have gone a little deeper into her ancestors' lives in New Orleans and whatnot. Because and I could be wrong, but I don't think that they really had a guest on that had a Caribbean ancestry that they didn't know about. Like I thought that they could have gone a little deeper with that, and they didn't.
I don't think that I'm trying to go back into the recesses of my mind to think if there was ever a person that had it quite in this way. I want to say there was one other person they talked about Haiti with on this show, but I cannot remember who it is. And I may be getting Many Rivers to Cross confused with this particular series, but I know he's talked about Haiti. I agree with you wholeheartedly, James, about, it hurt my heart because y'all know me and Alex, Willie, Bernice, I was gonna say half the panel has Louisiana research or Louisiana roots, and to see the way that we just skate, doom, doom, bounce. We did that, did a turn and a spin, and left the booth. We totally missed. There was a huge opportunity for New Orleans to and free people of color, Faubourg Treme to get the spotlight, and honey, we skated right about that skating rink last night.
Mika,
hold on. Let's get Teresa, and then we'll have Alex chime in after that.
I was going to say, you just mentioned free people of color. If he says we're rare one more time, it's just, I'm like, no, a lot of us, we're rare. We're not rare. We're out there.
Yeah.
You're more like well done.
10% by 1865.
Exactly. That was the stat that I threw out on Twitter last night. So just for our audience, to repeat what Renata just said, 10% of the population of African Americans in the United States was free. So we had 4 million slaves, 400,000, that's close to 500,000 people that were free. So that's something to consider, when you start going back and doing research, when you get back far enough, and you may not be able to find a slaveholder, and maybe that there was not one with the folks that you're trying to unearth. Alex, what were you going to say?
So I was just going to chime in about maybe 6 months ago, I traced Ava Duvernay's family tree just out of curiosity. And when I watched bits of the episode, I was like, come on, say this. Come on, give this. Because, I got newspapers, listen her family, like, she had criminals, she had all kinds of criminals in there. And I'm just like, come on, give us something. Because when I was researching that, I was like on the floor after, after researching some of her family tree, that I was just like, oh, why didn't y'all could have gave us a little more than that, especially for the diversity in New Orleans research. And as long as her family had been there, as impactful as her family had been to the city, let alone how the city had been in fact impactful to her ancestry, I'm like, y'all could have really highlighted more subjects.
But wasn't it because they only focused on one line?
No, that's not true. Well, actually, let me rephrase that. I think they did not touch her mother's side because she's still living. That's what I think. It was just probably out of privacy concerns. They did research her biological father and her stepfather that raised her. Those were the two lines that they took. But still, even with that, come on now. We are in Northeast Louisiana. You could have gave us some love. We didn't get no love. Now, here's the thing. We can't say that the researchers didn't do the work because we don't know. A lot of this stuff gets left out on the editing floor. We have to remind people of that all the time. The editors, the producers, they make the decision as to what goes into the final cut. They want stuff that's compelling. They want the big reactions. They want the tears. They want the sad. They want the happy. They want the screams. They want all those things. And they may have found all the stuff that you found, Alex, and she may have not reacted to that stuff the way that you just reacted about her tree, and it's not even your tree.
Can I pause the conversation 1 second? I just want to give a shout out to my Zulu warrior, Alex, my Zulu brother right there, because I think you're not a real genealogist if you haven't secretly cyber-stalked one of your celebrity people and traced their family trees. I think that's something is it just me? Like, am I the one that does that? Like just think of random celebrity.
Listen, I created the whole original Motown musicians' family trees.
Yes.
I don't have time for that.
I have done that.
Listen, when we hit our brick walls, we start researching other people.
Because you're like, I gotta make sure my skills are sharp. I'm not letting y'all do. Okay, y'all. Okay, the chat room is jumping. That's all I'm gonna say.
I'm not y'all looking at it like it's just me.
Chat room is like me and True are like, Lord, we trying to keep up. You guys are on it tonight. I will read some viewer comments now, just to take a little bit of a break from the monotony of us talking, but we're not done. We still got some stuff we want to get to. So let me go ahead and bring these on up so we can Charity. All right, so comments from viewers. Linda Okazaki, one of our buddies out there in Oakland, California, she says we need to let people feel the experience. She agrees with Bernice, but those of us who are primarily white have an obligation to better understand the historical truth and to share that truth. You better preach. Pass the collection plate, Linda. All right, third chapter asks, why do we focus on the reaction of those who enslaved?
I have a response for that if we're responding.
Oh, sure. Feel free.
Oh, well, I just wanted, I saw that was typed kind of after I said the Ted Danson thing, but I just wanted to say that for me, it's just a response to a human being's reactions. It's not because he's the descendant of the enslaver or not the enslaved one way or another. It was just something that touched me. His reaction just touched me as a person, and I never really thought about who he was the descendant of. So I don't know if that's the case for everybody, but for me, it's just a human.
Well, the other question that just tag a little bit on there is just that why, I think one of the questions he may have had is like, why didn't he just free him? And he's just telling him that he bought the freedom for his wife and his family. So then why, I know it's a question of the income, but like, was there something more about that, you know? I don't know. But it was touching. He was like, if that book was burnt, you know, burning his hands. He just kind of dropped it and pulled back.
I agree. Another comment, Beth Wiley said, it's a complicated thing, a hard, complicated thing. Learning about my slave-owning ancestors was not the first thing I learned about mine, but it is certainly one of the most eye-opening experiences I've had in life. And as I mentioned before, the chat room is flying, so they're just gonna keep on chatting and commenting.
You know, I just want to add a comment, and it's based on an interview I had with Edward Ball when he spoke of his family as enslavers, and he said one thing he noticed is that they want to feel that they were good, that they were kind, that they treated people the right way. I mean, everybody wants to think that, not recognizing that, wait a minute, the person was enslaved, you own that person. So whether you treated them right or not, the fact is that you owned another human being. And that's the problem, and that's the issue.
I think it's also important.
Go ahead, Angela.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's just important to also realize, though, that we are reacting to television. And as you pointed out, Nika, already, you know, we don't know what ended up in the cutting room floor. At more than 20 minutes per person to do with it. And what we see is that television moment, whether it's laughter from one guy who's gonna, oh my God, oh gee, or another person who's being very pensive. They're all television. Extreme emotions are television moments. And from, I think the question in terms of why do we focus on the enslaver, there's also, if it's a television moment, you'll see the reaction looking at their enslaved ancestors. Let us recall, was it last season, Donna Brazile was there and she's reading a document of a 6-year-old being willed to another human being, and of course her voice is breaking up, she's choking up, and she's a little bit tearful. Television moment. And so we have to realize we're also working within the medium in which the information is being delivered to us. I can remember an extreme emotion that I had sitting in the National Archives in a cubicle by myself, seeing the names of my ancestors and a column saying slave of Emmeline Perry. Nobody's around me, no cameras are on me, right. But I'm allowed that moment because I'm by myself, as Bernice said. And we're getting that, you know, through television, that, oh, the person is realizing this is happening. And so we're kind of in that regard. But as was just pointed out, the institution itself, institution, the fact that you have on paper, even if you were always kind to Toby, Toby's movements were forever restricted. That is a violation of the human spirit. And the person who descends from that person has to realize, oh my God, this person violated another person's freedom, movement, joys, just the basic human right to exist. So apart from the televised moment, dealing with some very serious things.
I was also going to add, if you have a chance, CC Moore, if she's at a conference, sometimes she gives, like I attended years ago, a session she did on behind the scenes, what gets cut on the floor. So just peep her at some of her conferences, because she might give a similar talk where she discusses, other things.
I would say that, yeah, I would add in that would be from the genetic genealogy perspective. I don't think, unless Johnny Cerny's group, they have them on tap to blog what was not put in the show on the website. I haven't seen where they actually share what's on the cutting room floor from the genealogical perspective, but I have seen, as Teresa said, where CC does share at conferences what was not put into the show when it comes to DNA. And that is something that I felt was definitely lacking from last night's episode, was the DNA focus, maybe connecting with, other family members, or maybe some discoveries, which of course, they usually will hold if the celebrity is related to somebody else into the show that person comes on, they'll bring that person sort of like back, do like a retrospective and say, oh, you match this person from a previous episode, stuff like that. The things, of course, we talked about earlier, we were in internal medicine. Now we've been triaged. We're going to triage ourselves to the specialist right now. We talked about the slave schedules. And as I mentioned before, this has been something that has been really like a thorn in all of our sides, the whole time the show has been on. And let's just back up a second, because we have to remember, not everybody who's watching may be aware of what the slave schedules are. You may have seen them mentioned on this show. Usually they'll say, we think this is your ancestor, or this is your ancestor, and it's just a blank line. They'll give a little bit of a description saying what it is. We've had the census in the United States since 1790 every 2 years. Back in those early years, the slaves were actually counted on the same line of the census with their owner, but just as a number. In 1850, a separate, in 1860, a separate set of schedules that went along with the regular population schedules were put into the census by Congress, and they were called slave schedules. And there was a bit of debate. In fact, Afrogenius has a great article that's on their site, which is where I learned about this because it's properly researched there, where it talks about the decisions that were made with regard to the slave schedules, and how there was a big argument over whether or not to include the names of the slaves on those schedules. The argument was made that a lot of these large slaveholders would not remember the names of all of their slaves. So why would you require that they write down, or that the enumerator be able to write down all their names? And of course, that is what what Congress went with. And that's why we have blank lines for names. We have an owner, we have a gender, we have an age, and we have a race. And then we also have a column for whether or not that person was a fugitive slave. And then the only other column that they have is the number of slave houses or dwellings that the slaveholder had. If a slave was over 100 years old, they were supposed to be enumerated by name, but that did not always happen. There also are rare instances where slaves were actually listed by name that weren't 100, but those were a fluke. By and large, slaves were not listed by name on the slave schedules that took place in 1850 and 1860. Now we're going to jump into a conversation about why these schedules cannot be, or really should not be, used as primary sources. And I'm gonna mute Ellen because she is over here like, She's giving me the shuffle papers right now. It's okay. So what I did was, because there was a lot of conversation had on last night's episode that talked about how rare it is to find the names of slaves in official records. And everyone on this panel can tell you that that is not true. I'll repeat what I said again. There was a line, and it may not have been the researchers who wrote this, it may be the people who write the show that said this, that finding the names of the enslaved in official documents is rare. And that is not the case at all. Okay, that's not the case. And the way that we're going to prove this is that plenty of people on our panel have done research where they have traced back in their own families when it comes to verifying a slaveholder of their ancestors, meaning the person who was the slave owner of their ancestors on paper, and they found them through official documents. And we have a number of official documents to share. And I'm glad that our panel sent in different documents, because this will give you, the viewer, folks who are still waiting to find that name, to verify that person on that inventory, on that deed, whatever it is, it'll give you hope so that you can research your family and you can get the clues that you need to find the information to knock down that brick wall. But it doesn't come in the same box with the same ribbon, the same everything. It comes differently. So the first person I'm going to have discuss their documents is going to be James, because he sent them in first.
I have a tendency to do things like that.
You do. So one of the things that I want to point out is we have a few, and these are from different states, you all. These are not from the same states. We have a couple of different cases that are from Alabama. And one of the things that stuck out to me in seeing what James sent over was that this estate file for a person named Moses Weems on the folder had the names of the slaves listed. And this was from 1851. And every single one of these that the panelists sent over to me had the names of the slaves on the folder. And this is an official estate folder from Henry County, Alabama. This is not personal papers. This is not a slave schedule. This is an actual set of estate documents. And before we even dig into what was in the folder, you can see that the names of the slaves were on the outside. All right. So James, what do you want to say to us about Moses Weems before I read what is highlighted? I have highlighted and red.
No problem. Well, I'll just tell you very briefly how I got to this document. I was actually stuck. I had a brick wall very early in my genealogy journey. I knew that my third great grandfather's name was Jason Weems. And as you can see, well, if you can see the outlined list there, Jason is not listed on this document. The reason why I found this document was because during newspaper research, I found out about Moses Weems being an early founder of Abbeville, Alabama. I knew that's where my family was from. And then I found out that Moses actually, when he came to Alabama as a pioneer, he brought an enslaved man with him by the name of Zeke Weems. And you'll see several people with the name Zeke there. So these were the only male Weems that I knew of in the area. I knew Moses, I knew Zeke, and then I knew my ancestor Jason was born about 1852 or 53 according to the census. Fortunately, I didn't have to spend any money to find this. I got it off Family Search for free 99, found his estate record, and to my bitter disappointment, on the front page, which is the this folder document you see here, Jason was not listed. However, I knew that there were 404 pages to this document as a court record, and I figured, well, Jason was born around this time. Maybe I could find him. And then, as you'll read in the document, I guess, Nika, I guess you said you wanted to read the
what I was going to do, since it's going to be a little bit hard and I don't want the quality of the photo to be diminished, but this notation here at the bottom left-hand corner says the state of Alabama, Henry County, Court of Probate and Vacation, December 1836. Whereas William Weems heretofore applies for an order of partition. And what that is, meaning that several people have interests in a group of slaves or a particular slave, meaning that they could legally divide you into thirds or fourths or sixteenths, whatever it was, depending on how many family members from this particular family, had a claim to the estate of the deceased. So in this case, William Weems applied for a partition because he wanted to make sure that his interest in these particular slaves was protected. And okay, I'm gonna have to mute you guys because you guys are all over the place tonight. All right, and so bottom left-hand corner, we've got, whereas William Weems heretofore applies for an order of partition and certain slaves in common by him with Francis M. Weeks and Moses L. Weems. So this means that all three of those people had interest in the following slaves, okay? Sam, Jack, Cheney, and the following children. Increase of Cheney. When you see the word increase, that means children of or children to come from. Cheney, to wit, Sarah about 18 years, Zeke about 16 years, Missouri about 12 years, Zuri 10 years, Dicey about 7 years old, Jason about 5 years old, and Bud about 2 years. And so you mentioned Jason wasn't mentioned on the outside of the folder.
Right, because if you and in reading the document, what I found out was that basically what happened was Moses Weems, when he moved to Alabama, he was married to one wife, had one set of children. Those children became adults. His first wife dies. He remarries a second woman and has a second set of children. And if you had seen it in the folder document, you'll see the different sets of children listed there. The older adult children sued their younger siblings for ownership of his property, to include his slaves, which I now found were my ancestors. What I found in reading the court documents was at the beginning, because this case lasted, and Nika, I apologize, I think you misread it. It wasn't 1836, it was 1856. So the man dies in 1851. This case isn't decided until almost the end of the decade. What happened was, the beginning of the trial, Cheney was actually pregnant. And inside of there, I believe it's the document on the on your right-hand side of your screen, you'll actually see a receipt for a midwife to tend to her.
Yes, the one this is right here. So look at this. So not only do we have an estate file with the folder that says the names of the slaves, we also had a partition request or order asked for, we just saw. Then James just pulled this document that's at the top right-hand corner of my screen here. This one right here is a receipt for a midwife to deliver a baby from Cheney. This was all in an estate file. This is not a slave schedules.
Yeah. And here's the funny thing about that, and I guess probably one last thing I'll say on it. That document right there is actually not for Jason. If you remember in the list of her children, Jason had a younger brother named Bud. And according to the family story that I found out, see, his oldest son's name was Thomas Weems, aka Uncle Bud, is what everybody called him. Uncle Bud was actually named after his uncle, who was Cheney's other son, who died in childhood. So that right there also helped me connect oral history and the documentary history as well, because I knew we had another relative who took that name on later on through the years. So finding all this out was very emotional for me, because all we knew in my family was we went back to Jason. Little did I know, these white men, these white Weemses, I've since found out we have a blood tie to them as well. And then I found all these other siblings of his, which I was able to explore. And what I found out was, researching Granddaddy Jason's other siblings, I found out that their father was also named Zeke Weems, who was an enslaved person who you see in the document. And his father was the original Zeke Weems, who had come over into Henry County, Alabama, with their slave owner Moses. So I uncovered so many generations of my family just off this one file, and I honestly get emotional looking at it, even as I'm talking to you guys now, because this was really the starting point, not just for my family, but for Black people largely, because I found so many people were related to us, from Rosa Parks to Dr. Naeem Akbar, all coming from this same little unit right here. So it was really, really amazing.
Something else that I want to point out too, just briefly before we move on to what Willie sent over, is that when you're dealing with estate files, you also have to consider that there may be minor children involved, and their names will be involved, or the documents will have their names also, because if a child was underage, the slaves had to basically be kept in trust for them until they reached the age that they could manage them themselves. So you'll also see that that's what this document on the left-hand side is regarding. It's with guardianship issues. All right, Willie, if you could briefly touch on what you have in Greene County, Alabama. I'll show this briefly. This is another folder, another county, but you see here the names of the slaves are on the actual estate folder. And talk a little bit about this inventory, Willie.
Okay, so what I was doing was I was researching my fourth grade aunt, which was Sarah Jane Reynolds, and I found out that she was married to a Zach McCracken, whose sister was Henrietta McCracken, and she married a Jack McShane, and I think you can see him. His name is Jackson. He's the one right underneath his mother. He's worth $375. And I came across this because I knew I wanted to get past that part so I could find out who her parents were. So I typed in her name and I looked it up on family search, and that's how I came across that document.
And so what we're looking at right now is an estate inventory. And this is not the slave schedules. Here, and yet again, we have another document where you have the name of the enslaved listed along with a value that was associated with them. All right. And the next document that we have is from the Indian Territory. And this is Angela Walton Rajesh. She submitted this one. Unmute yourself, Angela.
Okay.
There.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. This, of course, is a document coming out of Indian Territory. And I was researching my great-grandmother, Sally Walton. And imagine my surprise when I'm finding this record. I knew she was a Choctaw citizen. And I see this document coming out of Scullyville. And there are not only Sally, but the rest of the family there are both of my great-grandparents, Uncle Houston, my grandfather, who is Sam Jr., and Aunt Louisa. We call her Louisa, not Louisa. And but over to the right, where you see underlined in red, slave of Jim Davis. Wow, I did not expect to see that. Sally was born in 1863, in the middle of the Civil War. She died in 1961. She was 98 years old. I knew her. This is a person I knew and loved. And I'm researching my Choctaw great-grandmother, and I see a document that clearly says she was the slave of Emmeline Perry. Now, this is part of the Dawes records. Many people hear about the Dawes rolls. Well, this is a document that comes from that collection. And of course, there are 14,000 files like this, by the way. The document that you're looking at there is an estate inventory from 1860, different family line. This is out of Giles County, Tennessee. My family with the last name of Bass, B-A-S-S, and of course you see that early script where it looks like B-A-F as in Frank S, but it's B-A-S-S, who died in 1860. This is an inventory of his property, and this is a portion of that, listing all 40 of his slaves. And the people whose names I have underlined in red are my great-great-grandparents, Irvin and Nancy, and then many who were enslaved with them, including their children, one of whom, as you see underlined in red, is Mitchell, my great-grandfather. And Mitchell first appears in the census in 1870 already as a young man who was, of course, by that time married with children. So, as you said, that is not a slave schedule with a blank line. They are named.
All right, moving on, we're going to go with Renata. This is a document that she presented to me. We're going to go in order. We're going to start with Chloe and then move to the other two docs you sent over.
Okay, so this I think is the bottom of a page. Is that correct?
Yes, this is okay. Where it talks about the slaves. I'll read it out just so people can know what it says, because it's in old handwriting. But it says, in addition to the foregoing articles sold, the following slaves have come to the hand of the executor and have been divided by petition, to wit: Sim, Bob, Greene, Minga, Lewis, Abram, Minor, Calvin, who was our person of interest here, Joe, Creasy, Eliza, Ben, Dudley, Nicolette, Betsy, Cynthia, Easter, Job, Sarah, Arch, Caroline, and then Sim's child.
So this is after my Calvin was my great-grandfather, and he actually had 4 different owners in his lifetime, and there's a possible 5th that I actually just came onto this week that may or may not have happened. So in a presentation that I do, Finding Calvin, I follow him through those 4 owners and show the documentation. None of which is a slave schedule, but I do use the slave schedules to support what is found in the other documents. So this was his first owner, Chloe Crudup Perry Neal, and she estate is being probated in 1852, and so this was my baseline for showing Calvin that she was Calvin's first owner.
Okay, and then we'll move on to the next one.
I have to remember what I
And
sent
this
you.
is, she's like trying to remember.
Okay, so this is going to be Calvin's third owner. I guess I did not send you what happened in between there, but the one that we just saw was, you saw that they said there was going to be a division of slaves, and in that division of slaves, Calvin was given to Chloe's daughter, Elizabeth Temperance Neal. So, which was in lot 1. For those that aren't familiar with it, the slaves are divided into lots. And so he went to Elizabeth Temperance Neal, who later married James H. Yarborough. That should be an H, not a Y. She married James H. Yarborough, but then she died just a couple of years after she married James H. Yarborough, and Calvin became his property. But then he died just a couple of years after, about a year after that. And so I don't know if you can put the document back up. I see Angela.
Okay. This is the one you're talking about.
Yes. So this shows, this is the inventory from James H. Yarborough, who was deceased in 1860. And it shows Calvin as the last human property left in his inventory.
And then this last document also notes Calvin here as well, and it talks about a petition of the estate, and this is just yet another document here, and I just want to remind everybody, I'm gonna actually come off of have you seen a slave schedule yet? Nope, we're not done.
That last one actually goes with the one before it, and on that last one, you see that the slaves are given valuations, and that will also give you a little bit of information about perhaps whether or not the enslaved person had a skill, a specific skill. Sometimes it's outlined, like Jack the blacksmith, you can see that he's the highest valued, and Calvin is at $12.50. It gave me support for Calvin's age at that time. He should have been about 20 or 21 years old, which you know is prime age for a working man. So it just gave me even more support that I had there. I knew I had the right person, but it gave me more support for that. And again, the slave schedules did support it. You know, there was a black male, the right age for him, and he was the only one. But I would never have just used that to say, oh, that's Calvin. So.
All right, absolutely. I have the last one here, and I'm showing this because it also sort of feeds into what Renata talked about with regard to having several owners. Sometimes people seem to think that there was one slave owner, when in fact there could have been, you know, multiple. She just mentioned 4, and I'm going to share literally 4 in a space of about 5 or 6 years for one particular family. And I wanted to make sure that I shared this document because this was an agreement. This is similar to a partition. A partition is typically done after somebody dies and their descendants are having to get their equal shares of the property, which included slaves. But in this document, which could be very hard to read because of the copy, this was an agreement that was established that was similar to a partition, but it was done with living people. No one had died. And this document was from 1852. It was an agreement, transfer, and etc. between Nancy Jenkins, D.C. Jenkins, and Hugh Short. Parties acknowledged that in accordance with the private act between the said parties dated the 14th of June, 1850, so that was 2 years prior, and a supplement thereto dated 9th of July, 1851, they acknowledged that each to be the owners of the following named and described Negroes, to wit: King, a Negro man aged between 40 and 45 years, and his wife Rachel, aged about 40 years, Henry, a Negro boy child of the said Rachel, aged about 17, John, a Negro boy of said son King, a son of King and Rachel, aged about 12, together with King, William, Andrew, and Mary, an infant, and other younger children of the said King and Rachel. And so this was an agreement where they, you know, were making sure legally that they were all protected, their interests were protected in the same slaves. We move forward to 1858. So 6 years later, we then have a deed that documents the same slaves where what had happened was the woman who was a party of the agreement passed away. She left her portion to her son. Her son then sold their 2 portions to the final owner. And this documents the exact same family. This was January of 1858. And it goes from D.C. Jenkins of New Orleans to Hugh Short of Carroll Parish, Louisiana. 2/3 interest in the following slaves: a Negro man, King, age 50, a Negro woman, Rachel, Rachel's son, Henry, King and Rachel's children, John, King, William, Andrew, for the value of $4,260, and adjusted for inflation, that's $119 as of 2016. For this particular family. Last, I'll share a will. If you notice, we've shared estate documents, inventories, deeds. We've shared a Dawes card, but we have not shared a will. This is an actual will that mentions slaves. Now, when the show makes a remark about the slaves being mentioned in official documents by name and it being rare, I can see them saying that about a will, but not the estate. In this case, we have underlined, in sale of my property to pay the debts, I wish my Negro man, King, his wife, Rachel, and family. So these are 3 separate documents that talk about the exact same slave family that are not a slave schedules that get you before 1870, but you have to do the due diligence and you have to do the work. And there's a question that's been asked a couple times in the chat room, and I want the panel to weigh in before we jump into Ask Mariah. And Karen Harper Royal asked the initial piece of it. Now, let me read her question as well as another person. She says, why do you think Finding Your Roots does not use these types of documents on the show and uses ambiguous slave schedules instead? We also had another person named Shelby Ward who weighed in asking, she said, is it atypical for the episodes, including enslaved ancestors, to share documents like the ones being discussed now? If so, why do you think that is so?
Simply put, I think that they have a formula for a format for a particular time slot that they try to stick to. Not to say, again, we don't know what gets left on the cutting room floor, but I just think that they have a format that they, because family history can be so to try to explain and contextualize. So I think it's just like the easy way out, for lack of a better term.
I also think that it may seem like the easiest thing to do.
Yeah.
To go from, this is the surname, let's look for a surname 10 years before that person is listed in a census. Whereas a lot happens in that 10-year period. What happened in 69, what happened in 68. And no one talks about, well, maybe you can find out who the former slave owner is if the person had a Civil War pension. They may list the slave owner, but it's a lot perhaps easier, or it appears to be easier for them just to take that surname and go straight to the slave schedule.
I feel there is.
Go ahead, Miss Angela.
Go ahead. No, I was just going to say, I think that there's a tendency to want to begin with the premise, oh, you're Black. Okay, let's go find your slave ancestors. That, oh, your people were free. Well, that's extremely rare because the norm is slavery. There's a site that someone shared with a group of us about a week or 2 ago on a professional site saying, oh, we can help you do your research and help you research your African-American ancestors. But slavery is really hard and you got to do this. They started out with beginners. You don't start out African-American research diving into the era of slavery. And so I think that there is there's a certain assumption and a certain narrative. Many things are framed. And that narrative, oh, you're Black, they must be slaves. Oh, well, a couple of them were free, or hey, don't worry, your folks freed somebody. We all need to figure out a way to sometimes realize that different, and our story is extremely complex. And dealing with that complexity, we cannot assume that slavery is the narrative that from which we start that dialogue.
I agree. I think it's short-sighted to assume that every African-American person comes from enslaved people.
Right.
If you have ancestry from New Orleans, you could come from several generations going all the way back of free people of color. Or if you lived in Maryland, Anne Arundel
Or if you
County,
lived in
Howard County.
Charleston. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, there's a number of locations that were huge bastions for free people of color. But I'm going to go back to something I said in one of the previous times we had a recap of the show. And for me, and I still haven't had this question answered. If you're doing the due diligence and you're doing the research and you have the proof of who the owner is, that is more compelling on paper than a blank line on the slave schedules. So I don't necessarily say that I agree that one presents better. You know what I'm saying? That the slave schedules just makes it easier jump because the surname is the same. I think that's something that's a principle that we've heard over and over again is, oh, just look for the nearest white person with the same last name, which doesn't always work. That I think that's more from our world. Honestly, like I said, if sound research is being done and they're finding the documents that they say they are to confirm a slaveholder, you've already got the proof. Why not show the proof? I think that there's a challenge because you have to explain to somebody why their ancestor is listed next to a feather bed with a dollar value.
Right.
That's challenging. Or how you can break a single person or a family up into thirds.
Lots.
That is more challenging. We have to remember they may be only giving an hour to film these segments. And so he may not have a lot of time to sit there and really flesh out exactly what an inventory or a partition or what these other things are. We would hope that they would, maybe off camera, maybe it's not filmed. I don't know. But I know based on my experience with doing these sort of reveals that they aren't telling the on-camera talent, or they're not telling the celebrity very much before they get the reveal, because they want the reaction to be authentic and not rehearsed. So that we have to kind of keep that sort of in mind. But in my opinion, like I said, if the due diligence is being done on the research, then you need to just show the actual name versus a blank line. But I think in some ways, maybe that was a cop-out in years past, and they didn't have to qualify it with, we think this is. Because the public had their trust, had the trust, and we assumed that they had done the due diligence. Now we know that they may not have been because of the whole Ben Affleck thing. So now we're questioning, and now they have to qualify it by saying, we believe. Before, no, it was just, this is your ancestor. I don't know. What do you all think?
Derek Jeter, right? Well, I think you're right, Ninka. I think at the same time, the fact that the slave schedule, I think that's what's on the mind of the team. Oh, we got to 1870. Oh, slave schedule. Okay, wait a minute. Let's put on the brakes. We're all genealogists. We're in the same community. We're all on Facebook. We're all on Twitter. We all attend Roots Tech and present at Roots Tech. And we all know that, oh, yes, well, the Freedmen's Bureau records have been indexed, a good number of them. And, well, and there is the Freedmen's Bank, but it takes time. And I'm sure the team, the research team, Johnny Cherney and her team, and certainly they're very, very able researchers, but it's going to take time to find them if they're not familiar with certain other institutions that existed critical years that we're looking for people. There's a slave schedule. We'll go with that. That's quick and easy, because it's going to take time to go through the Internet Archive, or go through Family Search, or go to the archives branch and pull out that reel of microfilm that has the Bureau of interest to you. And but there's the slave schedule. But no, we've got to get that, in fact, we need to put it aside. Schedule, but not for DNA rather, not for a genealogy reveal moment.
And I think they have an opportunity as well with the website. They could do follow-up there, as times are changing, and we know that, like Bernie said, I feel it too, that's just outdated. It's not a primary, it's not a secondary anymore. So they need to utilize their website more for after action review. I would like to see them do that more.
Yeah, that's another thing. Alex, let's take some wrapping up comments before we get into Ask Mariah. So of course, we got Ask Mariah. Yeah,
I think that one reason why the shows use the census records as the default, the slave schedules as a default when it comes to African American ancestors, is because I think that when we need to think of the scope of the show, I don't even think half of the viewers are genealogists or researchers like us. So when you're presenting it to an audience that doesn't know the breadth of genealogy research, especially when it comes to African Americans, then you're going to have these constant reteaching of a will or of a probate record, or of letting people understand Black people were property and the ways that property was recorded. So can you imagine having that taught over and over again on these episodes before people really get it, and they can present all of the information that they may or may not have found. So if you were to go into Freedmen's Bureau records, you'd literally have to teach the history around the Freedmen's Bureau in whatever bit of a segment that they do have. That's not to dismiss the fallacy in them using these census records over and over again, especially without any supporting evidence. But I think that it does explain why they continuously do it. So
yeah, I think that's a valid point. Karen Royal also chimed in in the chat room. They clearly have more film time with each guest than we see, so they can show that extra footage on their website, so we can see more information that they have shared. And I agree that would be something to make the show last a little bit longer. They have done that in years past, and they've blogged about certain things as the show happens. But I have not seen that this season. So, any final thoughts before we go into Ask Mariah for tonight?
Just open it up a little more. I was very tantalizing to hear about Saint Domingue and the Caribbean Basin and all these interconnections. I'm hoping that they can do more with that.
I agree. All right. So it's time for your favorite part of the show, which is Ask Mariah. This is the time where you, our viewer, get the opportunity to submit questions, queries, conundrums, whatever it is that have to do with your genealogical research, and we, the panel, weigh in on your question or your submission. I always have to remind folks that our panel has not seen the query before tonight, and that's because they will try to work it to death, and they'll be tired of it by the time you all see it. So I have to withhold that from them. So here is the question for the evening, and this is a quite meaty one. It's from Jill Birch. She says, my family would like to know what happened to Perry Blake and his son Perry Black. Perry Blake is my great-great-granduncle. His sister was my 3 times great-grandmother, Mary Blake Mobley Flo, born circa 1880, died September 16, 1965. Mary lived in Lancaster, South Carolina, and died in Concord, I think it's Cabarrus. I'm not sure how you say that. Cabarrus, North Carolina. Cabarrus. All right. And in terms of other stuff that she mentioned, she said that Perry Blake was a character. He was, we think he was a pimp and bootlegger.
Yes. Oh.
That was James. He wants the more colorful people. She said she's found articles about him or his dad burning down a white man's barn and having an alibi. She says he ends up being killed by the police and buried without the family being notified of his death. This sounds sort of like Ta-Nehisi Coates' father in his FBI file last night, a little bit, right? And she says, we want to know if Perry was part of the Bumpy Johnson gang. There were stories about a connection with the Blake and Petty family in Lincolntown, North Carolina, who were bootleggers. This is all the same Ask Mariah. Following, she says the children of Lloyd and Laura Blake are John, Perry, who she's asking about, Mary, her ancestor, and Eliza. She says they haven't found any documents showing Perry and Mary living with their parents, Lloyd and Laura Blake. She says in 1880, Lloyd, listed as Lloyd, is listed with his mother, Phoebe, listed as Phoebe Blake. Now, last slide, she mentions that Mary Blake Mobley Flo, which is her 3 times great-grandmother, and her brother, Perry Blake, are listed in the 1900, 1910, and 1920 census in Lancaster, South Carolina. Perry Blake's case with regard to him being shot by police and all that is found in an old newspaper in Pineville, Mecklenburg, North Carolina in 1931. He's also found in articles in several other states' newspapers. So let me know if you guys want me to go back over anything that I've read so far on this case.
What year was it that was that article?
1931.
Okay.
So her original question is she wants to know what happened to Perry because it's, you know, what and his son. It looks like she's trying to find descendants. What would help with her exhaustive search at this point?
But didn't you say he was killed and buried without the family knowing?
Yes, he ended up being killed by police and buried without the family
Okay.
being notified of his death. So, but that doesn't account for any other potential children that he may have had.
Because you said she wanted to know what happened to him, so I was trying to. Okay, but children. Okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Could I ask how she knows, or how that, if the family wasn't notified, was it like a court case or a newspaper? Just curious, like. I mean, she's asking, she doesn't know about him, but then she's telling us that she's dead. It's been killed by the police. So then I'm just curious.
Yeah, I don't think she's in the chat room, so we're going to be talking to.
All right.
We're going to be talking to the Sky tonight.
Well, one of the things I would suggest, if she has a newspaper account stating that he was killed by the police, there should be a coroner's report.
Yes, I was going to suggest that too. I would also ask her, but she didn't mention a death certificate, and when he died was around when they were, you know, adherence to that was being done. And South Carolina was actually pretty early on that in terms of southern states. So I would also ask about whether or not she had, gotten a death certificate.
Yeah, is she 100% sure that he was killed, or because I mean I had a family member who killed a white man in Florida, and James may know something about this, but what I'm told is that with the assistance of the Masons, he changed his name, got a new identity, moved to Norfolk. That's where he met my grandmother. He was married to my grandmother, and never was connected to his former family again. So, like, does she know for absolutely sure that he was killed?
Well, the ran off story. Ran off.
Well, let me say this on this, and I've only been looking at this the same amount of time as everybody else. I mean, just looking this guy up on newspapers, I done already found on newspapers.com, that is, I done already found like 3 or 4 incidents of him having shootings with police. So him getting killed by that, like I'm like, this guy had like 2 or 3 different run-ins with the cops where he gets shot. Like, this is like, I've never seen anything like this before in my life. This is amazing.
Are you sure it's not the same report, but from a wire service?
Right. Yeah, could be the same article.
I'm looking at different months. I'm like, this guy, he seemed like an interesting person. I wish I had more time tonight to really dig into this guy. This is amazing.
It sounds like James is going to dig into this guy more tonight. That's what that sounds like.
Well, I love thug stuff. I love street stuff. So, like, anytime you got a bootlegger and cops shooting shot, like, I love stuff like that. I grew up
one of the things I would recommend, look to see if they name other people as part of getting in trouble with the police, because she might want to research those people to see if there's information that would take her back to him.
And then I would say the most obvious thing, if you're trying to find descendants of him, is DNA.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure you test the right people in your family to get back to this line, or confirm, that your relations are on this line of the family. And, there may be some extraneous children. I mean, if he was really all about that thug life, he has to probably have, babies here, there, and everywhere. And I would say too, if he was in trouble that much, courthouse, some of the stuff people forget, you have to go on site to look for these things. So, you're looking at superior court cases, criminal court cases, however the municipality is set up in North Carolina and South Carolina, to see when he's been charged for fines. Did he go to the prison farm? Looking at the state archives to see if the prison records are there, if he went to the state prison, versus the county prison. That'll add a little bit more flesh on the bones for things. And then, looking at his occupation occupation? What was he doing on those censuses? You know, that was in addition to his illegal occupation. Now, I have a great uncle. I actually have a notation in the book, in my family history book, that we don't really know what his job was, because nobody really knew what his job was. But when you went to visit him, he'd be running numbers up and down the block. He was a gangster. He really was. He always was dressed nice. And somehow when he was in his 80s or 90s, he just mysteriously ended up dead and nobody knew why. So there are those things you kind of have to search out. Anything else before we move on? Any other suggestions? Because she's...
I would also say that, go ahead.
I would also say to check out the local historical society, especially their vertical files, because they might have a file on, you know, criminals.
I would also say to check out to research some of the actual, like, the judges and the lawyers, defense, because I'm looking at some of the articles, because I actually see where she's already clipped some of these things on newspapers.com. I would say to look into some of the defense attorneys and people also that and some of the judges to see if they have papers or anything like that in a university or something like that in the area.
Right. Also remember, if it's in the newspaper, they're getting the information from somewhere. Yeah, they're writing it from the dockets. They're writing it from what they're picking up at the trials. They're writing it from the, as you said, the police reports. So that's really where she needs to go. Because somebody may be bailing him out too.
What you said, that might be baby mama. Baby mama.
You never know.
Bailing out.
You never know.
Wait. I just found something here. It says, Coroner Gresham impaneled a jury today to investigate the cause of the death of Perry Blake, who was shot a month ago by policeman Charlie. Died last Tuesday in the Good Samaritan Hospital and was buried. I just found this article. Let me clip this and send it over to you, Nika.
Okay, and the other thing I would say too is don't just look at the county courts, look for the city courts and see if they also have records, because that might be separate from the actual county. Anything else?
Now was
on a current event?
So now was Perry's parents named Lloyd and Laura?
Yes.
Okay, so I think I may have found a family tree online. Let's see.
It might be hers.
Might be hers. Because
Yeah.
it lists his wife as a Hannah.
Right. I found that also.
Okay.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Okay. Send that on.
It lists some children too.
Okay. They this is actually a DNA cousin of Bernice, and so she said that that is Jill's tree that you're looking at.
What I would find to coincide with the Perry and Hannah situation, there are several children, and a lot of them seem like one of them I even found has a child that most likely is still living, born in the 30s. So if she was to look at relatives or be looking for relatives, tell her to look in Philadelphia. That's all I'll
All right. All right. Well, Jill, we hope we have assisted you enough in this time on Ask Mariah, but please keep us posted. Let us know what you find. If anyone mentioned links or anything like that, we'll be sure to email those to you. Keep us posted on what you find. And also, if you have a question, query, conundrum that is coming up for you in your genealogical research, feel free to submit it to us. It's free. It doesn't cost a thing. And maybe you'll be the next person up for Ask Mariah here on our next episode of BlackProGen Live. Moving quickly into current events, we've got a couple. This one is from the state, and it talks about the proposal that state representatives Bill Chumley, Mike Burns have submitted to erect a monument to, quote, Black Confederate soldiers. And this is an opinion piece that notes that it seems like an attempt to rewrite history to make the Confederacy look better to modern sensibilities, which I agree. It also mentions that the representatives point to 328 pensions given to former slaves and free people of color during the 1920s and 1930s as evidence of Black Confederates who, quote, loved their state so much that they, quote, fought courageously against the United States military. This is historically inaccurate. Whoever this author is, Adam, Go ahead, Adam, because you telling it like it is. These pensions were not evidence of Black Confederates. Instead, it merely shows that ex-slaves who have been forced to labor for the Confederacy through the threat of violence in the 1860s took advantage of an opportunity in the 1920s to receive payback. Most of these Black pensioners labored for the Confederacy because their masters took them to war. Slaves, by definition, cannot volunteer as they do not own the rights to their own labor. Those eligible for pensions were explicitly referred to as, quote, body servants or male camp cooks, not soldiers. Indeed, the enlistment of African Americans in the Confederate Army was barred until March 1865. Even then, a last-ditch plan to preserve slavery by freeing a select group of slaves in exchange for fighting was never fully implemented. In regards to this article, here's my question for the panel. What is the danger of attempting to right a wrong, but you're not inclusive in your efforts?
It is called a lie.
In that order. Right.
Next subject.
But there's an effort being made to honor history, right? We're tearing down monuments to the Confederacy, and we're trying to amplify the voice of the African American Confederate to replace those monuments to the.
Give it no time.
Yeah, well, I mean, my biggest thing would be to just say that where are all the like Black Confederate family lores of like I actually know a descendant of Silas Chandler, and like in their family history, like they're like, what the heck are these people talking about? Why are they always uplifting him like he had a choice in the matter? You know, if you don't know who Silas Chandler is, look him up. But yeah, next.
I'll concur with you. Definitely will add to that. Like, I don't understand why, when it comes to issues of Confederate descendants, right? People who are the strong advocates for keeping the Confederate flag up and all of these things, they'll quote their heritage and their ancestry. When Black people are descendants of people who were Confederate soldiers, most likely those are going to be white men, right? And then on the other end, if we do have a Confederate ancestor who has happened to have been Black, most likely they were a free person of color, who at many times their property, their family, and their freedom was threatened had they not complied with what was the law. So we have to take that into consideration. Ain't nobody celebrating that. You know what I mean? They didn't even celebrate that. Let's look at it like this. In the early 1900s,
She's standing up.
You have to stand up. Baby, you have to stand up. Y'all done got him on his soapbox. Get on your soapbox, baby.
I'm busting a sweat talking about this because I've been dealing with it in class all week. But real talk, in the early 1900s, there was a picnic, a Civil War reunion of some sorts. Do you know that Black people, both Confederate and Union, were excluded completely from that? So we ain't celebrating none of that. There's nothing to celebrate. There's no monument to go up in memoriam of forced labor.
What the real danger though is
wait a minute, we got to get the baby. We got to clap for the baby because the baby came. He had to stand up. He had to get that out because he was in class all week and he had to sit there and act like the good student, and he wanted to yell that out at the professor. So whoever you are at Laney College in Oakland, California, right off of 880 freeway, by the lake, you got my child riled up, and he had to let us all know. All right, go ahead, Ellen, and chime in before we move to the next
I just wanted to say the most insidious part of it is that they actually made it like they manifest a body out of wax. So then circulate a picture to then prove a lie, which is just it's just bad. It's just bad. It's like they're not even content with like a paper that lies about it. They got to give you a puppet too. You know, it's absurd.
She said they gave you a puppet. Lord have mercy. All right. Our last current event for the evening is from Seattle Pie. And this talks about Alta Vista Cemetery, which dates back to 1872 and holds the remains of veterans from the Revolutionary and Civil Wars, including Confederate generals. And the cemetery was segregated until the mid 1960s. And the unmarked graves are believed to date to be from the 1870s and 1950s. And these are unmarked graves of African American people. A project was born in 2015 in the wake of the racially motivated shootings at Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston, South Carolina. And it's the latest effort to memorialize the buried. After being an open secret in town for decades, the full extent of the unmarked graves was discovered a few years ago after the city used ground-penetrating radar to locate them. Rumor has it that there were supposed to be around 200 graves, but they discovered 5 times that amount. And it goes on to say that there were medallions that were placed by the city for each of the grave sites, which numbered over 1,000. It was 1,146 graves that were unmarked. But after that, they felt like they needed to do more. So a committee consisting of mainly Black residents was formed to come up with a design, and they wanted to do something big. And I will note that the story does say they wanted a monument that would evoke, but not a monument that would evoke white guilt for the past. That's something that was mentioned. And so what they did was they erected, I think it was 5 benches, 5 marble benches that were put there. And this was sort of a collective community effort. And so I wanted to make sure that I shared that story because it was a nice, interesting juxtaposition with the previous story that we shared about South Carolina. Wherein you had these people allegedly making an effort, which was nothing more than just to cover up their denial. That's really what those wax figurines were for, was to cover up denial and not have to be shifted. But then you have this other community who came together to acknowledge a wrong, to make a wrong right, and also memorialize these people who were there. So exactly, forced narrative versus memorial, absolutely. Anything you all want to chime in on that story?
Well, since you mentioned cemeteries, I'm going to give you a Byram African American Cemetery update. Early October, the couple who hijacked my ancestors' cemetery in Greenwich, Connecticut, they filed a lawsuit against the town of Greenwich to prevent the acquisition of the cemetery, the land acquisition. And they named the town of Greenwich as a defendant, as well as unknown persons who may stake a claim. So you know what I'm doing. I'm already ready to mail out tomorrow basically a 200-page document to Superior Court, and it's on like hot butter popcorn. That's all I can say.
Well, and that's sort of the point of sharing some of these things too, is we imagine there's an effort in addition to putting down these plaques or these unmarked graves to locate the descendants of the people who were buried. So if you know of someone who was in Gainesville, Georgia, who may have died and been buried at this Alta Vista Cemetery, you may want to check into seeing if they have a marked grave or not, and seeing if you can get some sort of a commemoration or something more added to your ancestor's grave. But it also goes back to the point that, you know, as we migrate out of these areas to different points and, you know, locations within the United States, a lot of us forget about our burial grounds of our ancestors, and this is what happens. We've talked about cemeteries a number of times during current events on the show. We talked about that one in Tennessee where the man got the people arrested even though it was in neutral ground. Just keep these sort of things in mind as you travel and as you document your family. So any other parting thoughts before we get into the reminders for the next episode? Anything you guys wanted to say?
I just want to make sure I shout out the fact that we had Howard University Bison on Finding Your Roots last night. I got it right from my school.
I wanted to share something. Is this the right time to share somewhere where you're speaking?
As long.
Huh?
She went out. She muted herself.
I'm saying as long as it's brief.
Oh, yeah. Just wanted to put a plug in for Explore Your Roots happening in Alexandria, Old Town Alexandria on Saturday. I'll be part of a 4-person panel talking, doing an introduction to genealogy, and then it's followed by a historical walking tour of Old Town Alexandria, Alexandria with Manumission Tours. And if you're interested in that, please go to aarp.cvent.com/Alexandria Genealogy 102817.
Ooh,
Probably
Jesus,
have to
that's a
replay
long
that.
URL.
That's all I can say. There's also a phone number, 1-877-926-8300. So anybody listening in the Northern Virginia area, DC area, get back and give them a call or go to the website.
All right. Thank you, Renata, for the reminder. Good luck on your panel. Our
Thank
next
you.
show is People of Color in the Northeast, Connecticut, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire. Learn tips, tricks, and resources and more for genealogy research in those locations. Don't miss the next episode of BlackProGen Live, airing Wednesday, November 8th, 2017, 6 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Central, 9 p.m. Eastern. Followed by that, we've got 5 civilized tribes, freedmen of the 5 civilized tribes. The Cherokee, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Seminole, and Creek were revered groups of First Nations people who have a complicated history that involves chattel slavery. Learn about critical record sets when researching these groups and the complex relationships they have with their freedmen. Tune in on Wednesday, November 15th for Freedmen of the 5 Civilized Tribes. And our last show of 2018 is taking place on Tuesday, November 28th. In honor of National Novel Writing Month, or NaNoWriMo, join us for the last episode of 2017 for BlackProGen Live, where we discuss transforming your family history research into creative literary project. Don't forget to join us at 6 p.m., 8 p.m., and 9 p.m. for Pad and My Pen. More reminders. Tomorrow, we've got Sons of Daughters of the U.S. Middle Passage on the next iteration of Research at the National Archives and Beyond Blog Talk Radio with Bernice Bennett. We've got the next iteration of the African Roots podcast, care of Angela Walton Raji, coming this Friday, October 27th. And don't forget to check out our buddy Dear Myrtle for Mondays with Myrt and Wacky Wednesday here on YouTube. Also, don't forget to subscribe to The Lowdown. Get the latest and greatest from BlackProGen in your inbox. Subscribe to The Lowdown today. Check the description of this recording and any BlackProGen Live episode for the link. Also, don't forget to join the conversation. Did we leave something out? Is there something you had questions about, or maybe a comment you had that you wanted to direct towards our panel? Participate in the live chat on YouTube, and it's still flying right now. Also, you can hashtag us at hashtag BlackProGen, or add us at BlackProGen on Twitter, and we'll be checking and weighing in with your comments as well. Tyrone Craft is hilarious. He showed up late and was like, for 2018, are y'all going to talk about Florida? That's all he wanted to know. And the answer is yes. We will be releasing the schedule for 2018. We already have our subjects already fleshed out for next year. We're going to be coming up on our 50th episode. So we're going to be having a little celebration in honor of our 50th episode next year. We've got lots of weighty and meaty topics to discuss in 2018. So don't forget, you've only got 3 episodes of BlackProGen left for 2017, because we go on hiatus in December because we got stuff to do. We got greens to cook, gumbo to cook, we got food to eat, banana pudding to eat, presents to unwrap, just like you guys do. And also, I might not be here. Also, if if you're missing us, then check out, we've got 45 other shows that you can watch, that you can, I'm sure there's a nugget or so you can glean from our previous episodes while you're waiting for us to gear up in January 2018. So don't forget, we got those 3 episodes coming up. Don't forget to set your reminders on my YouTube channel so you don't miss those, especially the Freedmen of the 5 Civilized Tribes, because it is going down. Yep. If you're not sure how that's going to be, check out, Bernice had an episode where we just talked about the 5 civilized tribes. Honey, it was tea all day long. If you missed it, it was really good. So anywho, on behalf of the whole panel, for Alex Traps Chabala sitting in Oakland, California, Willie Russell sitting in California, True Lewis in Kentucky, Teresa Vega in New York, Renata is in Virginia. Was that right?
Yes.
Okay, I always get it wrong. Okay, sorry. Renata's in Virginia. James is in Maryland. We've got Ellen in Florida. We also have Bernice in Maryland and Angela's in Maryland. I'm Nika Smith. Thank you so much for joining us for BlackProGen Live. Don't forget to check out our next episode, which is taking place on Wednesday, November 8th at 6 p.m., 8 p.m., 9 p.m., and we'll be talking about people of color in Connecticut, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire. And don't tune out because you don't think you have any connections there, because you probably do. Have a good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.